later, he's on trial for murder. Andy explains that he had a fight with his wife because she wanted a divorce. However, the lawyer fills in the rest of the details. Andy knew his wife had an affair, and after the fight, he followed her to her lover's house and killed them both. Andy swears that he was drunk and only meant to scare them, also that he left without shooting. He claims he threw the gun in the river, however it was never found. The lawyer tells the jury that the weapon was fired more times than it could hold bullets, implying that Andy reloaded to shoot them many times. In the end, the judge sentences Andy to 2 life sentences, 1 for each victim. Meanwhile, a prisoner named Red is being evaluated by the disciplinary committee. Red has served 20 years of a life sentence and swears he's a rehabilitated man, but they still reject his parole request. Then Red is sent back to the yard, where a bunch of other inmates ask him for stuff. It turns out Red is the person who smuggles forbidden items into prison. Soon a new group of criminals is brought to this prison and gets lots of heckling from the other inmates, who place bets about which of the newbies will crack first. Red looks at Andy and isn't impressed by how weak he appears to be. Warden Norton tells the newcomers that the first rule is not to be disrespectful to the Lord, but the other rules will be learned as they go along. When a newbie asks when they'll eat, Captain Byron yells at him and hits him. Then the group gets hosed down and sent to their cells still naked. Once the lights go out, one of the newbies starts crying. The other prisoners make fun of him and taunt all the newcomers in general. Haywood harasses the man extra hard, hoping to make him crack. The inmates start clapping and chanting insulting nicknames, which gets the attention of the cops. The crying man swears he doesn't belong there, so Byron pulls him out of the cell to beat him up. Red notices that Andy doesn't make a single sound during the whole night. The next day at the dining hall, Andy sees the way everyone looks at him, so he decides to sit alone. He's disgusted to find a maggot in his food, but Brooks takes it from him to feed the baby bird that he's hidden in the pocket of his sweater. Meanwhile, Haywood collects cigarettes from his friend since he won the bet by making the man cry last night. When Andy tries to join the conversation, Haywood tells him off. Later in the shower, Boggs asks Andy to be his naughty partner, but Andy walks away. During the next few months, Andy keeps to himself to avoid trouble. One day he introduces himself to Red, who asks him why he killed his wife. Andy insists he didn't and asks Red to get him a rock hammer. Red agrees while explaining that Andy needs to hide it well because the cops do random inspections, and if they trace the hammer back to him, he'll never be able to do business again. Then Red warns him that Boggs and his gang known as Sisters will try to take advantage of Andy, so he needs to be careful. After Andy walks away, Red decides he likes him. Sometime later, a bunch of bags are delivered to the prison, and while nobody is looking, an inmate takes a hidden package from them. Then Red exchanges some cigarettes for new blankets, which he brings to his cell to find the package containing the hammer. He sends it to Andy by using Brooks's book cart. That night, Boggs and his gang surround Andy and beat him up before taking advantage of him. The next day, Andy appears with bruises, and everyone can guess what happened. For the next 2 years, Andy is constantly abused by the Sisters. Sometimes he manages to fight them off, but most of the time he fails. In 1949, Norton announces that workers are needed for a factory for a week's work of outside labor. Lots of inmates volunteer, including Red and Andy. Red has a chat with a cop, and his group of friends is chosen in exchange of cigarettes. Under the scorching sun, the prisoners work hard on the factory roof while the guards chat. Byron shares that he's recently come into an inheritance that is now being taxed on. Andy overhears this and approaches him while ignoring Red's warnings. When Andy tries asking some questions, Byron gets angry and drags him towards the edge of the roof. Before he can be pushed over, Andy offers him advice on how to hold onto his money. At first, Byron is skeptical, but when Andy offers to help him set up the account and prepare the forms in exchange for beers for his friends, Byron accepts. During the rest of the working week, the friends could end their day drinking cold beer. However, Andy doesn't touch alcohol because he's given up drinking. Back in prison, Red and Andy play checkers. Andy admits he prefers chess and plans to carve his own set. Red again asks Andy why he killed his wife, and Andy insists that he didn't do it. Then Andy asks what he did, and Red explains that he killed someone. Afterward, Andy starts carving the chess pieces in his cell. He also uses the hammer to write some names on the wall. Later, the prisoners are watching a movie starring a beautiful actress. Andy asks Red to bring her to prison, and since Red thinks he's joking, he says it'll take him a few weeks. On his way out, Andy is suddenly attacked by the Sisters. They take him to the projector room and kick the operator out. Andy uses the movie reels to defend himself and manages to break a man's nose. However, they still outnumber and easily capture him. Boggs punches him a few times before taking out a knife to threaten Andy as he asks for naughty times with his mouth. When Andy refuses, Boggs brutally beats him up, causing him to spend a month in the infirmary. After this incident, Boggs spends some time in solitary confinement. When he returns to his cell, Byron is waiting for him to beat him up. Since then, the Sisters never bother Andy again. Boggs is wheelchair bound and transferred to a hospital. Red wants to get a welcome gift for Andy for when he's released from the infirmary, so he convinces his friends to gather rocks for the chess set. While working in the field, Haywood picks up a rock and shows it to the others, who make fun of him because he's only found petrified horse poop. When Andy finally returns to his cell, he finds a bag of rocks and a poster of the actress. One afternoon, the cops do random cell inspections. They search Andy's place but find nothing. Norton notices that Andy's been reading the Bible, and they chat about their favorite passages. The poster shouldn't be allowed, but Norton agrees to make an exception. Later Norton calls Andy to his office and informs him that he's being transferred to the library for work. Andy finds a crow and Brooks in the library. Brooks shares that he's been the librarian since 1912 and never had an assistant before. Their conversation is interrupted by a cop sent by Byron, who needs some financial advice. After grabbing some paper and pen, Andy guides him through the process of setting up a trust fund for his kids. During lunch, Andy tells his friends that he's probably been assigned to the library so he can secretly advise the guards. He wishes he could get more books, but the others think the warden won't allow it. Andy decides to ask Norton anyway and his request is denied. Then Andy says he'll write a weekly letter to the Senate asking for books, and Norton agrees to mail them. For the next few years, Andy does all the guards and Norton's tax returns. He's also writing to the Senate as promised, but he never gets an answer. Eventually Andy manages to get Red as his assistant. In 1954, a prisoner runs to get Andy and Red because there's trouble in the library. It turns out Brooks is holding Haywood at knife point, saying this is the only way he can stay. Andy manages to calm him down with friendly words and Brooks has a breakdown. Later during their break, Red explains that Brooks has spent 50 years in prison and panicked when he was given parole today because he's forgotten how to function in normal society. Brooks frees his crow before he leaves prison. Returning to the city is a shock for him because cars were rare when he was young and now they're everywhere. He gets a job packing groceries at a store, but it's hard to keep up with the crazy modern rhythm. After work, he goes to the park to feed the birds. At night it's hard for him to sleep. After a few days of a routine he hates, he carves Brooks was here on the wall and proceeds to self-delete. A letter from Brooks soon reaches his friends in jail and the goodbye at the end tells them what Brooks was planning to do. Red thinks he should have died in prison with them. Sometime later Andy is shocked to receive a huge stack of used books and $200 from the government to fund the prison library. Among the books, he finds an opera record and decides to play it on the prison speakers so everyone can hear it. He also locks all the doors so nobody can stop this. Norton soon comes to scold Andy, who ignores him by turning the music up. Then Byron breaks the window and comes in to capture Andy, sending him to solitary confinement for 2 weeks. The next time Red appears before the disciplinary committee, he explains he's served 30 years and again swears he's been rehabilitated. Unfortunately, they deny his parole request again. When Red returns to the yard, Andy gives him a harmonica. That night Red tests the harmonica in his cell and Andy gets a new poster for his cell. As months pass, Andy starts sending even more letters to the government until they agree to do some prison renovations just to shut him up. Everyone works together to transform an old storage room into a proper library that even plays music. That year Norton announces the Inside Out program, a measure that gets inmates working on projects outside the prison walls. However, when he talks to the press, he doesn't mention that the men aren't getting paid, which means this is slave labor and he's keeping the money. One day a local contractor explains that he needs the new highway contract or his business will go under, so he bribes Norton to make him back off. All the money movements that happen during this period are kept in the books by Andy. In private, he tells Red that Norton is using him to create legal explanations for all this. Red warns him that the paper trail will make him more vulnerable to punishment, but Andy insists that it won't lead back to him or Norton. It'll actually go to a name he made up for this. In 1965 a new group of prisoners arrives. One of them is Tommy, who is guilty of breaking and entering. He has lots of stories to tell during lunch and Red's group quickly befriends him. Tommy left a wife and kid at home, so he wants to improve himself for them. He asks Andy to teach him how to read better so he can try to get his high school equivalency. Since Andy has already finished his chess set, Tommy becomes his new project. After a year of hard work, Tommy takes a trial test but doesn't finish it in time. He screams in anger and leaves the room after turning the papers into a ball that is picked up by Andy. Later Tommy is chatting with Red and learns Andy's story, which leaves him in shock. He calls Andy and tells him about an inmate he met in another prison. The guy had laughed while telling Tommy how he killed a couple while they were getting naughty and how the husband got blamed instead. It turns out Tommy's previous cellmate is the real murderer and Andy is truly innocent. A desperate Andy goes to see Norton and asks for a new trial, but Norton thinks that Tommy made the story up. When Andy threatens to reveal Norton's dirty money schemes, Norton sends him to solitary confinement for a month. While the inmates wonder if Andy is truly innocent, Tommy receives an envelope from the Board of Education. It turns out Andy sent them the test and he's passed with a C+, so now Tommy finally has a high school diploma. That night Tommy is sent to the yard, where Norton is waiting. He wants to know if the story of the real murderer is true, and Tommy swears that it is. Then Norton makes a guard shoot Tommy dead. Next Norton checks on Andy and tells him that they had to kill Tommy because he tried to escape. Andy tries to quit his accounting position but Norton says that quitting means the destruction of the library and losing the protection of the guards. On his way out, Norton tells the guard to keep Andy in solitary confinement for another month. When Andy finally comes out, he tells Red that while he didn't physically kill his wife, he drove her away emotionally, which is what killed her in the end. He also confesses that his dream is to open a hotel in a coastal town in Mexico. Andy wants Red to come with him, but like Brooks, Red doesn't think he could survive outside. Then Andy asks Red a favor. If he ever gets out of prison, Andy wants him to go to the oak tree in Buxton where he proposed to his wife and move a black volcanic rock to find what's underneath. During lunch, Red tells his friends that Andy has been acting strangely since confinement. Haywood shares that Andy asked for a rope and the group worries that Andy may be considering ending things. That night Norton makes Andy shine his shoes before sending him back to his cell. Red can't sleep because he thinks Andy will do something crazy. The next morning, all the prisoners come out of their cells except for Andy. When the guards check his cell, they find it empty. Meanwhile, Norton discovers that his shoes have been replaced by an old pair. The cops try to interrogate Red, who knows absolutely nothing. Norton gets angry and throws a rock at Andy's poster, which makes a hole and reveals a tunnel in the wall. The officers immediately search the area with dogs to no avail. They only find Andy's prison clothes, a bar of soap, and his rock hammer. It turns out that when Andy carved his name on the wall, he discovered how flimsy it was, so he started digging with the hammer and kept his project hidden behind the posters. He kept all the debris in his pocket and threw it outside during breaks. Last night, he replaced Norton's book with a Bible and stole his shoes. In his cell, he put his belongings in a box and tied it to his foot before crawling through the tunnel. Then he climbed down the pipes and broke a big one by hitting it with a rock every time thunder struck in the sky. And he got inside the pipe and had to deal with the smell of poop for 500 yards, but he never gave up and eventually managed to escape. Right now, Andy is visiting Norton's bank and taking his money by pretending to be the person he made up for the books. He also asks an employee to send a package to the press containing the stolen paperwork. Sometime later, Norton is horrified to see his name on a news article about corruption in his prison and he can hear police sirens coming for him. Norton rushes to the safe and inside the Bible, he finds the hole where Andy had been hiding the hammer. Byron soon gets arrested and Norton doesn't want the same fate, so he grabs a gun and self-deletes. A few days later, Red gets a postcard from Andy, with a clue indicating he's successfully gone to Mexico. The next year Red asks for parole again. When they ask him if he's been rehabilitated, Red says that rehabilitated is just a made-up word and that the person he once was is gone. They grant him parole and Red is finally released after 40 years. Afterward, Red is assigned an apartment, where he finds Brooks's carving on the wall. He also gets the same job at the grocery store. This soon takes its toll on him and he starts looking at guns. The only thing that stops him from self-deleting is his promise to Andy. Red hitchhikes all the way to Buxton and after a long walk, he finds the tree and the rock, which he moves to uncover a box. Inside he finds money and a letter from Andy inviting him to come to Mexico. Red immediately packs his things and takes a bus to a Mexican beach, where he finally reunites with his old friend. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more